we'll be going through mostly the graduate visa and the skilled worker visa today. Those being generally what students tend to move into following their student visas. We'll touch on a couple of different options as well. Yeah, those are the kind of main things that we'll cover. Yeah, next slide, please, Gareth. Yeah, so this is just a little bit of a diagram just to kind of give you an idea of the options available following completion of a course. So you'll note sort of at the top there, completion of a course is relevant for the graduate visa, although there is a successful completion requirement, whereas a skilled worker visa, there isn't, but you do need to have completed the course. It's a slight strange difference there, but essentially, once you've reached your course completion date, you could apply for a skilled worker visa, whereas you actually have to have successfully completed a course for the graduate visa. Like I mentioned as well, we'll discuss some other visas as well. Global talent. There's also the Innovator Founder visa. Some of you might have heard of as well. I'll touch on that. And then, of course, available options to other people are also the family visas as well, which we won't go into too much detail for. It's a little bit specific, but options are available to people who are partners or have partners who are British or settled in the UK. Yeah, next slide, please, Gareth. Okay, so the graduate visa. This is an available visa for students who have, again, successfully completed their course. The big advantage to the graduate visa is, and I'll come on to this later when it comes to the skilled worker visa, because of the kind of high salary requirements related to a skilled worker visa, the graduate visa is a really good opportunity for people to gain some experience and to be able to, sort of potentially find sponsorship in the period that they're in the UK as a graduate. Currently, the graduate visa is available for 2 years, although it will be shortened to 18 months, other than PhD students who can apply for longer. But that's going to apply from 1st of January 2027. Again, when I mentioned with regards to PhD students, they currently can be in the UK for 3 years under the graduate visa, comparably to the usual 2 for people from a master's or bachelor's degree. The other key aspect to consider is that the graduate visa isn't a route to settlement, therefore it also can't be extended. So it's a one-time thing that includes if someone, for instance, has held a skilled worker visa, returns, leaves the UK, comes back on a skilled worker visa after having done a graduate visa, they can't then apply for a graduate visa again. Yeah, again, that's one of the kind of the limiting factors of it. Next slide, please, Gareth. Perfect. So like with most visa applications, the graduate visa is split into kind of 3 distinct set of requirements. The first are the validity requirements. Now, these are mostly process-based. Essentially, you need to submit the correct form. You need to pay the relevant fees. There's an application fee of £880 plus the immigration health surcharge, which is currently £1,035 per year of the visa. So it is quite a considerable amount to pay. So it's like £2,070, so nearer about £3,000 in total. You need to attend a biometric appointment, providing biometric information, fingerprints, photographs, etc. All supporting evidence needs to be provided generally before going to that biometric appointment as well. The key ones, though, for validity is that a person must have been in the UK and must have held permission as a student as their last grant of permission. So that's the only kind of means in which someone can switch to a graduate visa is if they're previously in the UK as a student. Just with regards to decision times there, it's always something that people ask. Usually it's within 3 to 8 weeks, but there isn't a priority service. Submitting an application as soon as someone has successfully completed their course, that would extend a person's visa until the point they get a decision. So if you do submit an application for a graduate visa a little bit close towards your expiry of your student visa, then your leave would be protected until the point you get a decision. Next slide, please, Gareth. Perfect. So suitability requirements, these relate to a person's character or conduct, essentially whether there's anything about them that would mean they're considered unsuitable. So looks at things like previous immigration breaches, any criminal convictions, any sort of adverse dealings with the Home Office, such as providing false information. Generally, basically, if there's sort of things that you shouldn't have done, and the Home Office consider you not suitable. A kind of key one there also, which it does catch a few people out, is about there being outstanding NHS debt. Although people who generally apply for visas will have paid the immigration health surcharge anyway, so shouldn't generally be NHS debt, but it does catch people out every now and then. So just one that we've put down there to be considered. Next slide then, please, Gareth. Okay, so the main requirements that for a graduate visa are the eligibility requirements, and similarly to the skilled worker visa, it is a points-based visa. So there's 70 points that need to be received, and these are split into successful completion. Course of study must meet the qualification requirement, and must have studied in the UK for at least 12 months. Next slide, please, Gareth. Okay, successful course completion. I mentioned this before, but the kind of key thing to note is that successful course completion means actually having completed a course. It's very different to skilled worker, where it's actually, just reaching the end of your the qualification date on your CAS. It is that you have to successfully complete it. So usually what would happen is the university will notify UKVI that the course has been successfully completed, and therefore your graduate visa would be granted on that basis. So that is a key one. Always want to kind of look out for, particularly with regards to waiting for submission dates on dissertations and things like that, particularly if they're over the summer for master's students. It's always key to note that it has to be successful completion. Next slide, please. Okay, the qualification requirement, it sounds quite similar to the successful completion requirement, although there are some, there are some sort of specifics to it. Generally, what it means is that a person must have successfully completed a course of study that has been awarded in either a bachelor's degree or higher. There are some other qualifications, law conversion courses, foundation programs that can also be considered. But generally, if you've completed a course of bachelor's degree or higher with the University of Manchester, then you would be able to apply under this route. There's a slight bit of information there about the student union sabbatical officers. It doesn't come up very often, but provided that someone has been granted under the student union sabbatical officer role, they need to have actually completed that student permission in order to be granted. It's very similar, but it's just a bit specific for those people who are student union sabbatical officers. Next slide, please. Okay, studying in the UK requirement. So this very much depends on the course that someone has previously studied. So if it is for a course of 12 months or more, at least, 12 months or less, then they need to have been in the UK for the entire duration of that course. If the course is longer than 12 months, then you generally need to show that at least for 12 months of that period has been spent in the UK. Next slide, please. Okay, so I mentioned this before about kind of the advantages of the graduate visa. So it's worth kind of understanding what can be done when you're in the UK as a graduate. As I mentioned, it's for a period of 2 years or 3 years if you're a PhD, but as I said, decreasing from the 1st of January 2027. The main advantages to it is that a person can undertake employment. That includes self-employment and voluntary work. The only kind of things that are prohibited are undertaking employment as a professional sports person, and there is options for study, but it can't be suitable for a student visa. So that it just hasn't, it can't be with a university or something like that would usually offer sponsorship as a student. This is one of the big things that the graduate visa is useful for, is because people often find it's the easiest way to start, as soon as they've left university, go and get some experience, potentially get some experience from an employer who might be willing to sponsor them in the future for a skilled worker visa. So this is why the graduate visa is and can be really useful. Next slide, please. Okay, just a word on family members here. So there's been some fairly recent changes with regards to family members, but essentially it is possible for dependents to be in the UK as dependents, but only really provided that they have previously been here as dependents on a student visa. So it was one of the changes that had been implemented last year. There's some sort of general requirements that need to be met for partners and children. You need to be able to demonstrate the relationship. There must be intentions to live together. Children obviously need to be under the age of 18, must be kind of in the sole care of the relevant applicants and their partner if applicable. And of course, as generally goes, there are suitability requirements as well. But yeah, it is possible, but the big change is that it's only really permissible for people who have previously been in the UK as dependents on a student. Next slide, please. Okay, I've kind of covered a little bit on the benefits already, but you know, the big one, as I said, is the fact that people can use it as an opportunity to gain experience and to kind of build their employment in the UK. We do find that you know, sponsors think of it as a particularly good route is to hire people outside of the UK who are on a graduate visa. The main reason is because they can essentially pay graduates less than is required under the skilled worker visa, which I'll come to in a moment. But it's also really useful because it gives an additional amount of time in the UK and can permit someone to apply for a more permanent style of visa, something that leads to settlement, like a skilled worker visa. So it just basically gives you that extra time to find a bit of a more permanent solution. Next slide, please. Okay, it's just a few sort of general documents that need to be provided. Just to give you an idea, obviously, you know, each individual circumstances, there might be additional documents to be provided, particularly those related to any dependents applying. But generally, you're looking at providing valid passport, evidence of your e-visa, your confirmation of acceptance of studies, evidence of completing the qualification. And we say if held because, you know, in many circumstances, people might not have received their certificate when their visa is expiring because, you know, it might just be that their graduation hasn't yet occurred. So if it is held, it can be provided. But as I said, generally, the university would inform UKVI that you have successfully completed the course anyway. Just a word for any scholarships or sponsorship, if there's anybody who does hold such, there does need to be a letter of consent from the issuing body in order to actually apply. So that is a requirement as part of the rules. Next slide, please. Okay, we've put in some just sort of standard, or well, certainly questions that we see a lot of. Can students submit graduate applications before they receive final results? It's generally not possible. You can certainly have it. You can certainly have it kind of prepared, but as I said, the university needs to confirm, you know, that the student has completed their qualification. So you know, it's kind of important to keep that in mind, that successful completion is a key requirement. Can students submit before all course fees have been paid? Course completion does depend on having made full payments, so you wouldn't be able to be confirmed as successfully completed if you haven't made all course fees. What if the name of the course has changed? If the name of the course has changed by the sponsor, but the course content has stayed the same, then it's acceptable. If someone has changed course completely, then it may have been that it is incurred as being a change of course and therefore potentially under a new CAS. It does depend on circumstances, but generally, if the course content is the same, it can be acceptable. Is it possible to travel outside the UK after a person has completed their course? Now, this is one that comes up a lot. Provided that provided the current visa is still valid, a person can travel outside the UK. However, a graduate visa needs to be made from inside the UK. So it's important that a person comes back to the UK to make that application. They apply from inside the UK, and they do so, you know, once they have sort of successfully completed their leave. So it is possible to travel if, say, for instance, the course is finished technically, but you're just waiting on results. But it's just important to be back in the UK by the time that the visa has expired. Sorry, next slide, please. Okay, so skilled worker. This is obviously, well, we certainly find that most people see this as the more optimal route to move on to. The main reason for being so is because it is a route to settlement. As I mentioned before, graduate visas are not a route to settlement. So, you know, getting onto a skilled worker visa as soon as possible is often considered the more optimal thing to do because you then start your route to settlement. Now, as with the graduate visa, the skilled worker visa is split into a number of different requirements: validity, suitability, and eligibility. So I'll just cover those again. Next slide, please, Gareth. Okay, so the validity requirements, they echo very similarly to the graduate visa, making submitting the correct form, going to biometric appointments, paying the relevant fees. But there are some specific validity requirements that apply to students when making an application to stay in the UK or to switch or essentially to switch to the skilled worker visa. In order to do so, students need to meet one of the following conditions. Firstly, they must have completed the course of study for which the confirmation of acceptance studies was assigned. So essentially, when you go to your confirmation of acceptance for studies, you will see a course start and end date. The end date essentially needs to have passed in order for you to apply with regards to condition A. It's possible to apply before the end date, provided that the certificate of sponsorship that has been issued by the employer, and I'll come on to what the certificate of sponsorships are, but provided that's issued with a start date that's kind of after the course completion date, then it's permitted, and that's relevant for condition B. So you can make an application, but you kind of need to wait until after your course completion date for you to actually begin the sponsorship. What we see here, and I will cover it a bit further on, but what we generally see here is that people will say maybe for instance get a job. They might finish their studies completely but still be on a student visa. They might receive an offer of employment and their employer wants them to start straight away but can't issue the certificate of sponsorship until the course completion date because of this requirement. What often happens is that employers can issue a sort of a temporary fixed term employment until the date that the sponsorship can start. So that's often the strategy that employers take. Condition C then is very similar, although it's related to PhD students only. Rather than looking at kind of the course completion date, you look at the start date, and a certificate of sponsorship can't be issued any earlier than 24 months from the start date of the PhD course. So it's slightly different. It just looks at the start date rather than the completion date as it is for condition B. Next slide, please. Okay, so sorry, I won't go into the suitability requirements again because they pretty much echo the graduate visas, which I mentioned before. So the main ones to consider here are the eligibility requirements. Now, this is a points-based system. So again, looking to obtain at least 70 points. The points are separated into mandatory and tradable points. Okay, and these are all have their own separate sections as well. Next slide, please, Gareth. Oh, just go back one. Yeah, perfect. So the mandatory points. So 20 points for sponsorship. Now, this is an important one because it's worth noting that not all employers in the UK can provide sponsorship. They need to hold a sponsor license, which permits them to issue what's called certificates of sponsorship. So that's what you would then use to make your visa application. So this is really important for kind of, looking for employment in the future, understanding that not all employers can offer sponsorship. If they've got a license, they can then do so. There is a genuine offer of employment requirement as well here, but that also almost falls down to the responsibility of the employer as well, essentially showing that the employment is there. It's genuine. It's been advertised well. There's been interview processes, etc. A lot of this does get considered at the employer stage where they're looking to assign the certificate of sponsorship to you. They kind of need to show UKVI that there is a genuine offer of employment, but it is still something that's considered as part of the visa application as well and can be scrutinized in certain circumstances. There's 20 points available for job at appropriate skill level. Again, this is a really important one to consider because what this means is essentially not every single job in the UK can be sponsored. Even if there's an employer has a sponsor license, they can't sponsor for every single job that there is. When considering what jobs are available, you need to refer to what's called appendix skilled occupations, or there's additional roles in the temporary shortage list or immigration salary list. Now, if anyone's ever gone to it, you'll see how see a very long list of occupations that can be sponsored. Alongside them, what you would see also is a relevant code for that type of occupation. And you will also see the financial or the salary requirements. I will come on to the salary requirements after this. But that's essentially where you go to see whether it's an occupation code or sorry, an occupation that can be sponsored. One of the big changes that happened last year was that the government essentially increased the skill level for occupations that can be sponsored, moving it from level 5 to level 6. Now, this doesn't mean that people have to be skilled or have the skills to work at RQF level 6. It just means the role that's been sponsored has to be at an RQF level 6. Essentially, what this has done is it's made that list of occupations shorter. It's also increased the salary levels because the skills are a lot higher. So it's just something to take note of. It's something that changed last year and has had quite a big effect on people feeling eligible to apply for the skilled worker visa. There's some additional requirements in this if the work is related to certain scientific or engineering roles, particularly those in sensitive natures like nuclear power or something like that. There might need to be ATAS certification in order to be able to apply for this a particular job role. So that's the 20 points for a job at an appropriate skill level. The sort of final mandatory points then are the English language requirements. Now, a majority of you, I don't think would have to worry about this particularly, seeing as you most likely to attain a bachelor's degree or higher from the University of Manchester. Obtaining a degree from a UK institution is enough to meet the relevant level B2 CEFR for meeting the English language requirement. All other people generally need to meet it by a English language test in all 4 components, so that's speaking, listening, reading, and writing. Again, this is a change that happened last year as well. It increased from level B1 to level B2. But as I said, most people who have received a degree from a UK institution won't have to worry about this because they'll already meet that requirement. Next slide then, please, Gareth. Okay, so salary. This is the final 20 points that a person needs to obtain, and essentially it's showing that the job they're being sponsored under is paying a salary that meets the relevant requirements. Now, as I said, going to Appendix Skilled Occupations, the relevant appendix showing all of the occupation codes, it will also show the salary or the going rate for that particular occupation. There is a base rate that has to be paid to everybody, and that is £41,700 per year. However, when going to the relevant occupation code in these appendices or in the relevant lists, there is a rate that is often can be higher than 41,700, and it needs to be the higher of either the going rate in that code or £41,700. So that's always the kind of the standard thing to look at. However, there are certain circumstances that there can be discounts to this, depending on a person's individual circumstances, depending on the type of job role. So I'll go through those particular discounts, particularly looking at the new entrant rate, which some of you might have heard of. So option B is for those holding a PhD relevant to their job. This reduces the base rate to £37,500 or 90% of the code. So again, going to the code that should say the 90% code, but again, you're applying that to whichever is higher. So if it's higher than 37,500, that's what needs to be paid. Next slide, please. Option C is very similar. It is a PhD in a STEM subject. You'll note there that it is significantly lower for the base rate of 33,400 or 80% of the code. So it is quite a significant difference to the main, to the standard rates that need to be paid. Now, option D is relevant to those lists that I mentioned, or certainly the immigration salary list. Essentially, these are roles that are considered either at a shortage or lower skill level. This allows for a £33,400 kind of base rate, but there is going rates as well for that occupation code. It's not particularly a specific discount, but that's only because the immigration salary list basically just has all of the going rates there. You don't need to apply a particular discount because it just has its own rates. So it's still applying whichever is higher, that or the base rate of £33,400. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the big one. Option E is the one that most students either might have heard of or would most likely apply to them if they're looking to apply. The new entrant rate permits for a sort of a base salary of 33,400 or 70% of the going rate. Again, whichever of them is higher. So it's quite a significant cut, and one of the big reasons why employers like to take advantage of it. Now, to qualify as a new entrant, there's a number of ways that a person can do so. Firstly, they can be under the age of 26. Secondly, and most relevant to everyone here, is that their last or most recent permission was as a student, and that it hasn't expired less than 2 years before the date of application. That relates a little bit to the graduate visa, and I'll come on to that in just a second. Next slide, please. Other ways that a person can be considered a new entrant is if they have been sponsored for a postdoctoral position in any of the following codes. I won't go into them in too much detail, but you'll see that there is a relevant code to the particular occupation area. That's how you would see it in appendix skilled occupations. So there's a relevant code for each type of occupation there. Next slide, please. It's also possible to be considered a new entrant where working towards professional qualification in a regulated profession. The same applies for whether someone's applying for full registration or chartered status. So, for instance, someone's looking to become again a chartership in engineering or something like that. If it's with a relevant professional body, they could be considered a new entrant for that purpose. Now, I said I'd come back onto graduate visas as well. It is also permissible for someone to be considered a new entrant where where their most recent permission was as a graduate. Now, there's something to consider here. So the new entrant rate, it's only applicable for a period of 4 years. So a sponsor can only pay someone at that lower rate for a maximum period of 4 years. However, any time spent in the UK as a graduate will already count towards that 4 year total. So take, for example, someone who successfully completes their course, they apply for the graduate visa, they spend a year on the graduate visa and then attain a job offer from an employer that's looking to sponsor them. That sponsor could only employ them for a further 3 years at the new entrant rate because they've already spent 1 year in the UK as a graduate. So it's always worth kind of taking note of that. Also gets shorter if, say, a person has done a full 2 years as a graduate, therefore they can only apply for 2 years under the new entrant rate, and then following that any additional sponsorship must be paid at the higher end rates, the kind of standard rates that need to be applied. Next slide, please. Okay, I mentioned this before, just about kind of, well, the advantages to it. I mean, certainly for employers, there are some major advantages, being that a person can the employers can pay lower salaries, and that's what we see a lot of. People, employers do want to take advantage of it as much as they can, but that does trickle down to people such as yourself, students, and other young people, in the fact that if you have the opportunity not to have to adhere to the higher ends of salary levels, so there's more opportunity out there to apply based on new entrant rates. Yeah, it does help a lot of people, even though in the last year it has significantly increased. It is certainly something that's used a lot, particularly from an employer's standpoint. Next slide, please. Okay, one just final one with regards to options and discounts on the with regards to salary is option K. This is for health and care workers. It's a much significantly lower salary, £25,000, or again a going rate for that occupation code. The occupation codes are slightly different because they are based on kind of national pay scales, NHS banding, etc. So there's just a long list of what the bandings are. Those are the going rates. So that's what needs to be applied over the £25,000 if it is higher. Next slide, please. Okay, so the requirements I've mentioned already, I would say certainly the kind of the key ones, but there are some other requirements that need to be considered. There's a financial requirement which is applicable to people who are either applying to enter the UK as a skilled worker or have been in the UK for less than 12 months. Being in the UK and applying to switch to a skilled worker and have been in the UK for more than 12 months, it would automatically be met. The other ways it can automatically be met is if a sponsor certifies maintenance. What that essentially means is that the sponsor puts on the certificate of sponsorship that they confirm they will maintain you for the first month of you being in the UK. Alternative to that, if you're looking to meet the financial requirement, you need to show that you've got at least £1,270 held within the 28 days prior to submitting the application. The amount does increase if there are dependents being applying on the visa as well. So just another thing to take note of. But again, students looking to switch, most would have been in the UK for 12 months or more, so generally wouldn't need to apply. I would say my own experience as well, sponsors generally certify maintenance. So, even in other circumstances, it doesn't tend to be a requirement. Criminal record certificate. This is a bit more specific. Certain roles might need criminal record certificates or some form of other clearance. So as I mentioned, sensitive, engineering, scientific roles, things related to, nuclear powers. The first one that comes really to my head. They might need some form of criminal record certificate in order to apply. Next slide, please. Okay, worthwhile noting kind of the conditions related to a skilled worker visa. So generally, as I said, what you'd see is a period of 3 or 5 years granted. Now, this is dependent on how long a certificate of sponsorship is granted for. So considering what I mentioned about the new entrant rate, particularly if someone has spent 2 years in the UK as a graduate and then goes on to rely on the new entrant rate for 2 years, that's the length that they could be sponsored for. That's the length that their visa will be. So they'd need to switch to a new sponsorship after that, before that 2 years is finished. You cannot obtain public funds. Work is only permitted in the role that is being sponsored for, except there can be supplementary employment, but there is a limit on being able to do so up to 20 hours a week. The same applies for voluntary work and also for study. However, it's very important to note that any of those supplementary work, voluntary work, study cannot interfere with the role. A sponsor is responsible for making sure that the Home Office is kind of updated about about you working with them, about any sort of unpermitted absences and things like that. They've got a duty to update the Home Office about that continually. So if, for instance, supplementary employment gets in the way of work as based on the sponsorship, it could lead to issues with the Home Office curtailing leave. So it's just something worth to note. Now, as I said before, it is currently a 5-year route to settlement. However, there are a number of changes that might be coming up in the next year or so. Sorry, in the next 6 months even. I'll come on to those in just a second because I'm sure that a lot of you may have heard of them and might have some questions about it. So I'll address that in a second. Yeah, next slide, please, Gareth. Okay, as we did for the graduate visa, we've just put some, sort of brief information about the kind of documents that are needed. So valid passport, evidence of visa, financial requirement documents, if applicable, English language requirement documents, again, a certificate of having passed your course, criminal record certificates, if applicable, similarly to the graduate visa, if there is scholarship or sponsorship based, then you do need to get consent. And then documents regarding family, if dependents are applying, will also be needed as well. Next slide, please. Okay, we thought to put this in because this is something that people come to us a lot about kind of what they can do in terms of work whilst they're here as a student. So for those on full-time courses, the condition, as some of you may well know, is that you can only work for up to 20 hours a week part-time during term time. During holidays, vacations, you can work full-time, and that includes the period before the course starts. There's also permitted work for placements that is part of your course, and for postgraduate doctors or dentists on recognized foundation programs. Again, student union sabbatical officers, it's not often the something that comes up too much, but that can be granted for up to 2 years, but it needs to be granted particularly in that purpose, for that purpose. We have included a slight bit here about the innovator founder visa, and I will come on to explain what that is in a short while. But it's just worth noting that when an innovator founder visa is kind of being applied for, as that's the intention, a person can look at establishing their visa whilst transitioning to that visa. So essentially after having completed their course. This kind of leads on to the things that students can't do. Can't be self-employed or engage in business activity, except unless looking for permission to switch into the innovator founder route. Again, I'll come on to that in a second. But also working as an entertainer or professional sports person is not permitted, and filling a full-time permanent vacancy unless a recognized foundation program. Now, this is an important one, and it kind of goes back to what I mentioned about the validity requirements for a skilled worker visa, where it's a condition for condition B that you can apply to the skilled worker visa before the end date of your CAS. It's possible that you can still take employment with that employer, provided that the employer gives you a full-time temporary fixed contract, because it can't be permanent because you're still in the student work visa, but it can be a fixed contract. And this is a strategy we see quite often with the skilled worker visa. Particularly employers who want to, they want an employee straight away. It's an option that they often use. I believe even I might have a slide next on this. Next slide, please, Gareth. Oh, yes, we do have a slide on this. So yeah, that's just to give you a bit of an overview of how it works. So you can take full-time employment once you've completed your course. You can't take full-time permanent positions. So what we often see is a fixed term or temporary contract until the sponsorship can start. And there's just some further information about graduate visas. Successfully completing your course, you can submit a graduate visa application. You can then start working. Next slide then, please. Okay, some sort of common questions that we get. How do I find the list of sponsor license holders? There is a list. We've put a link to you there. I believe these slides will be sent out. You'll have access to them. So there's a list there of registered license sponsors holders. So if you want to go to it, you want to see who is potentially able to sponsor, that is a good place to start. How do you know if a job is eligible for a skilled worker visa? Again, appendix skilled occupation is the reference for that. It's a bit of a confusing page, I will admit, because there's a number of different tables. The ones that kind of generally apply, you're looking at table 1, because those are the ones relevant to people who are sort of newly applying to the skilled worker visa. What information or documents are required to establish a genuine vacancy? These, as I said, include things like job adverts, interview notes, providing CVs that kind of show that you've got the relevant skills to be able to work in that role, job descriptions. Again, this does kind of fall down to the employer, kind of the employer's responsibility, and it is considered at the time when the Home Office are looking at granting a certificate of sponsorship to be issued, but it's just worth noting that establishing a genuine vacancy is a requirement. Is it possible to switch employers when you're on a skilled worker visa? Yes, it is, but doing so, you would need to obtain new sponsorship. Need to make an application to change employment, and you can only start working for them once that's approved. So it's certainly something to take consideration of if, with regards to providing notice periods or giving a kind of a start date, because sponsorship is still going to be required if it's with a new employer. Changing employment roles within the current employment is another matter. So if you stay with the same employer, you may not need to obtain a new certificate of sponsorship if it's fairly similar to what you're already being sponsored for. And it can sometimes just mean the sponsor making an update to the Home Office. It does very much depend though. So it depends on exactly what the change is. If it's substantially different, it may mean a new certificate of sponsorship is required. Next slide, please. Okay, so I mentioned before that we discussed a few kind of alternative routes. Applying on family-based visa routes, it's a good one to move to. If you've got a British partner, or if you are in a relationship with someone who is settled, or even if someone is already sponsored and you want to apply to become their dependent. Those are all options. The kind of advantages to those are their routes to settlement. They are also available to work as well. So, if it applies, it is a good one to move on to. The Innovator Founder, it was something I mentioned earlier. This is a endorsement-based visa. What this essentially is for people who have an innovative business idea, so something fairly new to the UK market, and they apply to an endorsing body who considers that the business plan is innovative, scalable, and a viable business plan, and therefore offers them endorsement. If they offer them endorsement, a visa application can be made. And the Innovator Founder is a really good visa to get onto because you can obtain settlement after 3 years, certainly as the current rules are. And I'll come on to that again, why that's slightly different. So it is a really good thing. It's a high level to meet, and the business plans are, sort of highly scrutinized, but it is certainly a good visa to move on to if it's available. Now, global talent, this is something that we've seen a huge uplift with when it comes to, well, certainly since the changes to the skilled worker rules last year, a lot of people are looking into the global talent visa. What this is it's another endorsement-based visa, but what it essentially is based on you personally, whether your experience is in a particular field is either recognized or shows particular sort of impact, as for an endorsing body to consider that you have what's called exceptional talent or exceptional promise. The distinct difference between the two is that exceptional talent is for people who are considered leaders in the particular field. Exceptional promise is for people who are considered potential leaders in the field. So demonstrating the difference really comes down to experience and how much of an impact they have had. Now, it is a high threshold to meet. But again, it's a very good visa route to get onto because it can, in certain circumstances, be obtain settlement after 3 years. So if someone's granted granted a visa on exceptional promise, they can obtain settlement after 5 years. If they obtain it on exceptional talent, it can be 3 years. So again, it's a really good visa, but it is a high threshold to meet. And there's a lot of documents that the endorsing body needs to consider in order to look at whether a person fills one of those exceptional talent or exceptional promise requirements. Next slide then, please. Okay, this is just a kind of a little recent update that we thought it was worth mentioning. And people might have heard of it. Essentially, there's been announcements of an emergency break on nationals from Afghanistan, Cameroon, Myanmar, and Sudan, essentially meaning that they wouldn't be able to apply for entry clearance on a student visa. Okay. The main reason for this is because seeing sort of a high upload of people using the student visa to then apply for asylum, and essentially these changes are meant to kind of stop that. It's important to note these apply to entry clearance, not to applications to remain. So if someone's looking to switch, someone from one of those countries looking to switch to a new student visa, they'd be permissible to do so if it's applied from within the UK. Another key one is that skilled worker visas are no longer issued to any Afghan nationals. So again, this applies to entry clearance, not to application from within the UK. So if there's anyone who this might affect, who is currently a student, you'd still be able to apply down this route. You'd still be able to apply for a skilled worker visa if you apply from within the UK. Applying to come back to the UK with an entry clearance, you'd be prohibited from doing so. Next slide, please. Okay. There are some useful links there, but I thought that we had a slide with regards to upcoming changes with regards to settlement. We obviously don't, so I'm just going to briefly go over that. So you might have all heard about potential increases to how long it takes for people to be able to obtain indefinitely to remain settlement, permanent residence. The standard thing for skilled worker visas is that it is 5 years, but they're intended to bring up for all visas to take that up to 10 years. And what they've coined is this term earned settlement, which essentially is where certain contributions, evidence of integration, i.e. English language, or other means might mean that you can obtain earlier settlement. Mainly what this seems to focus on is contributions. So, and that's generally based on tax. So, the more money that has been earned, the more tax that has been paid, that is more likely to lead to a shorter term for obtaining settlement. The thing to take note of, though, is we don't really know how this is going to apply. We don't know when it's going to apply. The Home Office has only recently just finished the consultation on this, and that was last month. So we're waiting to find out more about what's actually going to happen. In a recent interview by the Home Secretary, that is a suggestion that it might be in the autumn this year is when we hear further on it, or at least when it might start to take effect. So within the next sort of 4 to 6 months, I'm sure we're going to hear further on it, but it's just something to take note of. It is also most likely to apply retrospectively. So anybody already in the UK might have to adhere to the new 10-year route to settlement. But that's as far as we know at the moment, given recent announcements. So yeah, so there's some useful links anyway to our website, to the government websites as well. Our website has all sorts of different articles and information services that get updated fairly regularly. So yeah, you can always refer to that if you are looking for some further information. I believe Gareth might mentioned it already or might mention it soon, but we also do offer a kind of a one-on-one meeting with university students and we can discuss kind of very briefly a bit of an overview of the rules. We can't advise, but it's an opportunity there to have a further discussion with us if you wish to do so. And I think that's all my slides. I think, Gareth.